Cunnisty, how are ye? Welcome to the Candlelit Tales podcast, where we tell Irish myths with original music. This episode gets us back to our series on the Fianna with a story of the young Fionn. The music on this episode is from Kwe-Veen. Kwe-Veen is a multi-instrumentalist singer-songwriter who produces his own music. He's from Dublin, he sings in Irish, and he takes a lot of inspiration from folklore and myth. You can find out more about him, including links to his music, in the show notes. To listen to our reflections and chats and to support this podcast, you can join our Candlelit crew following the links in the show notes. For now, Aaron, tell us a story.
So Lucra would train young Demna in the many ways of movement before she would teach him how to fight. Learning by looking at the creatures that lived around him in the forests, imitating and failing and falling until he scuffed his knees one too many times. Young Demna's determination kicked in. A look came over his face, but not for the first time. A look that would become that look everyone would recognise as trouble brewing. But he listened to his teacher, Lucra, how to learn to become a great warrior, to watch these animals, imitate them, and attempt to be brilliant. But it was going to take some work. Of course, before she could show young Demna the basics of holding weapons, and he often asked for this, he had to prove he was strong enough, fast enough to pass her tests. The tests were many. Observation, testing his dedication and his resolve. Sometimes he was told to go out and learn something for himself. A day of exploring, only being allowed back if he came with a story to tell them what he'd learned. Once he spent an entire day looking and watching and following a fox. How patient it was, how cunning, how slow and steady it would go, and then suddenly dart quickly to try and catch a rabbit or hare. The hares were fast. It loved to run bounding brilliantly. The rabbits were easier. Or at least he thought so. So the fox had to be patient, and so did he. So he trained. He watched the wild animals, imitating their skill under instruction, trying to perform their abilities with skill and grace. Until, after lots of stumbles, young Demna would leap like the salmon, attempt at least to sprint like the deer, scurry like the fox, or move silently through the trees so that not a single bird would be disturbed. But Lucra was a tough teacher, and if he didn't display everything to his best, she would test him with the willow whip. This was a test where she would chase him around the base of a wide open, wonderful ancient oak tree, and she would have in her hand a willow whip. He would have one too, and they would run in the same direction until they would catch one another up. They would set off at a dizzying pace, but eventually Lucra would catch young Demna and whip him on his backside unceremoniously. Not fast enough for the sword and spear, she would sneer. So despite his impatience, the young boy was steadfast, and he knew he had to show persistence, even though he was fairly persistent in his pleading to be trained with real weapons. Stare at the sky, young Demna. This was often her response. He was always trained to watch the sky. The secrets of the day lay in the sky above, she would say. When you see the signs of a westerly wind blowing in, you get off the hill before it blows too strong. Or seeing the lazy haze in summer and recognising that it would bring with it a certain and rare heat for that summer's sun. The soft, dry, smoke-like fog that floated up and around them when the autumn warned of its coming in towards the end of summer, reminding them to wrap up in the evening times with warm skin and leathers. Demna told Bomel that he had to be patient like a fox, although the lesson didn't really permeate his mind fully. he was still wanting just to train with sword and spear. She recognised that he was feeling a little less encouraged, and so she would inspire his desire to be the best version of himself he could be with the great stories of the heroes and heroines, stories of the fae and the godlike to a day. Sometimes he would watch the birds in the trees, great ravens, the crows, the robins, and always these robins came to say hi, and Demna seemed to meet a lot of robins that way. And once he saw one, he would always see another, but the magpies, he realised, they would like to steal things. And oftentimes, when he got to the edges of the forests and he went up to the hills, he could hear the curlews call, and he would sit and try and sing along. He'd come back to tell Bowman and Leia Lucra of the wide open places that he saw. But Leia Lucra would be stern. Bowman might laugh, but Leia Lucra would warn him that he was not to go outside of the forest, wagging her pointed finger, telling him he was under a great danger. You were always under threat. This reproach slowed the young Demna, but still he'd find his footfall bringing him to a riverside. And one day he followed the great fish, and seeing the salmon with its many colours and its scale fighting the currents, lashing its tail up that strong water flowing against it. Such a strong fish, he would think. Such perseverance going against the rapids, jumping and hopping. And so he ran alongside the bank. He ran. Seeing a story play out in his head that he'd tell to Bowman later on, about these fish going against the river. How they never gave up, they never surrendered. Their perseverance was brilliant. And suddenly he found his feet finding himself near a raft, a dune. He'd wandered too far. People lived here, in and around this wall. It was clear that Leia Lucra would kill him, surely. But he was curious. And then he heard a roar, a scream, a triumphant yell. And seeing as he was here now, after all, maybe he could just explore a little bit. Nothing could really go wrong as long as he stayed hidden, like the fox. So he stayed low, and he crept and he crawled, just like the fox, being patient, but wanting to know what this crowd was roaring about. He heard it once more, and so he followed the noise, like following a track. And there, in a wide open, cleared plain beyond the tree line, a great pitch of grass. And a whole lot of people gathered there to watch a ball being thrown from one side high into the air. It was a game. He crept in to watch it, and he tried to hide, but still he saw everyone else was watching the game, so he got a little bit closer, and it was the game of hurling, he heard someone say. Mesmerising. From the start to the end, he watched the ball being poked up and down, the clash of these hurleys made of wood sending shivers down his spine. He saw the players throw themselves and crash against one another's shoulders, the ball leaping out as men ran after it, skillfully scooping it up, picking it and hitting it across the other side of the field for more players to fight over against the pile of men coming in then, until one player came out and hit the ball over the bar. The pent-up tension burst and a roar erupted from the crowd. Demna let out a cry of satisfaction himself. It was brilliant. He was hooked. He couldn't stop watching it. The ball hit once more out into the milieu of amazing players, and then leapt up to see who would catch it now, and still the game went on, and his heart was beating faster and faster. He leapt to his feet, imitating the way the hurlers played, swivelling and scooping, crashing and barrelling past one another. Demna watched, and he learned as he did so, until finally the game was brought to a close, and all of the players who had been fighting each other so fiercely and furiously hugged, embraced, clasped hands and laughed. Some of them, he saw, were just like Leia Lucra, tall and strong, great long hair and just a brilliant stare in their eyes. Warmth. Some of them women, some of them men, all of them strong and fierce and formidable for sure, each one now clasping hands, shoulders wrapped around as they walked off the pitch together. Young Demna looked down at his feet and he saw a hurley had been left behind, discarded by someone. He picked it up and he felt the wood along his hand. Ash, he recognised. Turning it over, it was far too big for him, but he didn't care. He saw a ball there, and he went to emulate what the hurlers had done by scooping it up quickly, but he struggled and he couldn't quite get the ball up onto the hurley as easily and effortlessly as they had done. And suddenly he heard a voice. "Oh, who's this there now? Do we have another player, huh?" Young Demna looked. He saw a man staring straight in his eyes, shocked and surprised. He was caught out. He turned and he ran as fast as he could, his heart pounding in his chest, but he couldn't stop. He didn't stop, not once, not until he found himself back in amongst the forest filled with trees. And he found his way along the banks of the river, finding his way back to Bomel and Leia Lucra, sweat pouring down his forehead. Leia Lucra glared at him. "Where did you get that?" He looked at his hands and realised he was still clutching the hurley. "It was in the forest," he lamely lied. Leia Lucra snatched it off him. "Hey!" Then turned it over in her hand and smiled and said, "This is too big for you. Anyway, maybe it is time for you to learn to play the great game." That night, rain poured down, but all he wanted to hear was stories of hurling. And Bomel kept him warm and dry with stories of the great game. How Satanta killed the terrible hound with a hurley and a ball at a terribly young age and changed his name forevermore to the name Cuchulainn, the Hound of Cullen. To be an epic warrior, he first had to become an epic hurler, he realised. He couldn't sleep, instead insisting on more stories until Bomel told him of a fairy troop that came across the vale into a forest, planting seeds of rowan berries and great trees of ancient oaklands all around the place, and played a game of hurling, and she kept the story meandering on and on until Demna's eyes eventually grew heavy and closed. His dreams were full of ash clashing against ash, slithers flying over the bar, the roar of the crowd as he lifted his fist in triumphant glory. When he awoke, he was eager to go and play this new-found game. Where was his hurley? Nowhere to be found. Well, he was instructed in no uncertain terms that he had duties and chores and lessons to be learning. Leia Lucra walked off into the forests while Bomel took him around the campsite, cleaning and tidying and talking all the while, reminding him of the names of the great trees he was supposed to be learning, quizzing him on whether or not he knew the Brehon laws they had gone over the day before. Of course, he really just wanted to play hurling, but he entertained her, and she reminded him nonetheless of the many ways of caring for the forests and the trees. Under Brehon law, there were penalties if you cut down one of the noble rank, and Eric a fine for those great, brilliant trees all over Ireland. They were to be protected. And Dara, the oak, Cull, the hazel, these were the most noble of all of the trees. The yew, the crabapple, the Scots pine, and of course, and Crown Funchoga, the ash tree. But no matter how interesting she tried to make it sound, all young Demna really wanted to do was go off and play hurling with Leia Lucra. What do you think she's doing right now? When Leia Lucra came back to their camp, she had a small hurley crafted out of ash, plain and smooth, so he could pick it up and play. Today. They went training now, with his small hurley, and the slitter, she explained, was a ball wrapped in leather and stitched hard across its face, tight and round, and hard to catch without it stinging your hand, he found out pretty soon. He looked at the ball with amazement as he suddenly threw it up and tried to hit it as hard as he could as he'd seen the day before, but he swung wide and missed the ball. Leia Lucra laughed. Slow down. We'll take it step by step. First, she taught him how to scoop. Simply how to pick it up. There was the catch, the turn, the twist, the block, the roll, all of these we would get to, but first, how to roll the ball and pick it up. Roll the ball and pick it up. Step by step, little by little, this is the way he would have to learn every day. All he was able to do was roll and lift 1,000 times over. He would have to do it, maybe more. And soon, he thought, he'd be able to play like the legends he saw the day before. And so he rolled and lifted until she'd eventually show him the next skill, how to scoop and lift and flick, and how to hit the ball from left and to right. Scoop, lift, flick, turn, then to run with the ball on the end of the hurley. Well, he fell over the first time he tried to do that, but soon she was showing him all the skills of hurling, and how to move from foot to foot, how to step in, toss the ball, how to clash the ash together, to block, to hook, to turn, attack into defence, how to turn and throw the ball left and right, how to dummy, fake and turn and twist and make it even harder for anyone to block or hook. This was magic for young Demna. Each night, Beaumont would tell him his story, always something revolving around hurling these days, and each morning he would pick up his hurley as early as he could, take the slitter and go off training once more. Of course, he had many chores and learnings to go upon. He tried to get to those too. Once he managed to hit the ball well, he wanted to hit the ball farther and harder and more accurately. So he found a great oak tree in the middle of the forest where he would go to practice how to be precise. He'd hit the ball towards the centre, a flat part of this great tree, and it would bounce back to him, but he had to be perfect with his aim, and he would try and hit it as hard as he could so it would fly back and he could practice catching it too. But if he missed, well, he was off running into the forest to try and find the ball, which was fairly long sometimes. But if he lost it, well, he'd have no ball to play with. So he had to be really accurate. He didn't always have Leia Lucra to train with him, and her patience was pretty thin and wasn't quite able to be fast enough or strong enough as she always wanted. So he would go to the Dara, the oak, with his hurley and his ball in the middle of the forest, pucking left and right, scooping, twisting, turning, twisting, imagining himself in that field. Well, it wasn't long until he was showing himself to be strong enough and fast enough to train with sword and spear. Leia Lucra crafted these for him, but she was surprised somewhat when he wasn't overjoyed at the prospect of putting his hurley down for the chance to train with weapons. But train he did, and Leia Lucra taught him how to duck, how to parry, how to blow, and how to cast a straight and true throw with the spear. And diligently he went about this practice, knowing it was important, but as soon as he was done with the training, he'd pick up the hurley again and off to puck the ball against the tree until dusk would set in and darkness covered the forest. And this was how he spent his days, young Demna, learning in the forest with Beaumont telling him stories and myths of the land, various legends, knitting together the fabric of mythology of the land, the great heroes of the Fianna, Queen Maeve, Cuchulainn, the kings and the heroes of godlike people from the Tuatha Dé Danann, and all of those that came before them. She taught him everything she knew, and she told him everything she knew of the Brehon law, how those with more in this island were penalised more if they broke the will of the people and acted unkindly, how their penalty would be much more than if someone who had very little acted against the will of the people. Their penalty was not to overburden them, because desperation and poverty would draw people more into crime. He understood this. It made sense, he thought. As long as it was what the people thought was best for their community, this was the key to the Brehon law. And then there was the trees, and he began to know these, the nobles, Eric Fado, the lower division, Fala Fado, and the commoners, Arig Fado, and all of those. While he loved the trees, he loved learning them, he loved seeing them, he loved being beneath them. Less about learning, more about being with, seeing, sensing, smelling. The blackthorn, the elder, the spindle, aspen, juniper, and white beam, these the Fola Fado. But he had a special place in his heart for the Arig, for the commoners, as they were called, the alder, the willow, the scackgal, the hawthorn, this magical tree, and they would make tea from its berries, looking at it twisting and turning around in the hedge groves. Yes, it was a magical fairy tree. The rowan, birch, elm, cherry, these were all there too, and he learnt from Bomel as much as he could contain, and he learnt from Leia Lucra as much as he could train. And as soon as he was able to catch up with Leia Lucra with the willow whip, overjoyed with finally passing this test, he was back to training with sword and spear. She was more rigorous now, of course, that he had caught her. But even after a tough day in the forest, he would still go back to the oak tree, practicing left and right, scooping, picking, pucking with the hurley and slither, faster, jumping higher, stronger, hitting faster, and he was making a dent in that tree. He could see it, but he didn't care. He was imagining himself being there in that hurling pitch. Now some days when Leia Lucra went out hunting and Bomel was off doing whatever Bomel was doing, he followed the stream once more down towards the dune where he was forbidden to go, where people were gathering. And he found there was some days they congregated for the game of hurling more than other days, and so he'd simply go and watch, hide between the trees, watching whatever game they'd play together. Sometimes it was the youths, sometimes it was older players, strongers, playing amongst themselves. Sometimes there were bigger games, and other crowds from other places with different colours on their jerseys. He found out that there was a few teams that travelled locally around playing against each other, only in the summer months, of course. In the winter it was too wet, too windy, too dark, but this particular summer he'd been going down nearly every week, sneaking off to see whatever game of hurling he could watch, his favourite thing to watch. And he was disappointed whenever there wasn't a game. But one day there was a great game at stake. He followed a crowd gathering, and he tied up his hair, and he figured it would be fine. There was so many people, he wouldn't be noticed if he just followed them. And he overheard conversations, two rival teams playing against one another, while he snuck up close to the field. And he thought he was fairly inconspicuous, standing there at the side. He was young, but everyone was just watching the game. He wanted a good view of the game, nice and close. The game was going tit for tat. As soon as the ball was thrown in, it was hard going. These were rivals, all right. And it was point for point, and it was level ball going up and down. Men and women throwing themselves into the lurch, finding the ball, fighting for it. Not much in it at all between the two. Not much of a difference as points were scored, and a cry and a roar from each side who was supporting. But then, one of the players went down with a twisted leg, badly hurt. They were picked up and scooped off. They were down to 14. They had no one to come on for them. The advantage was easily seen. The travelling team now down one player. Suddenly that extra man made all the difference. There were spaces opening up, and by the time they got to half-time, well, they were down 2 goals and a score of points besides. All of the onlookers shaking their heads, saying it was a shame the game had been spoiled by an injury. The second half started, and not long into it, someone else went down injured on the travelling team. They couldn't play. A shoulder injury, a break perhaps, an arm now put into a sling. Suddenly the ball was hit over the bar and they were down once more, so much more. Demna was thinking about leaving until he saw the ball flying towards him, and out of instinct he caught it. Well, he was young, kind of wanted to show off, and there was no one right next to him, and the players were running towards him. Well, feck it, why not? He picked up his hurley, he threw the ball up in the air, and he hit it as hard as he could, and the ball sailed over the bar. He'd been dreaming about it since he'd seen it played. But then, in a daze, Demna realised this was probably not the best way of being inconspicuous. You'll play there now, go on! Get onto the team, sure they're down to 13, go on to fuck! He was pushed onto the field. He had no real choice about it, and suddenly he was in the game in the middle of the field. A huge brute of a man came running towards him with the ball on his hurley. Well, he simply sidestepped and scooped it off his hurley, ducking in and round 2 dodging tackles, skipping and lifting and jumping and hitting the ball over the bar as easily as he had been doing all those days in the forest. And he was suddenly cruising. He was everywhere in the pitch, jumping high and catching, hitting left and right. He was going and he was running, he was clashing in and out, the clash of the ash against bigger men and faster, stronger women. But he was easier, and he was lithe, and he was sharper and quicker and small and able to duck and dodge, swinging his hurley, and he was hooking and blocking just the way Leolukra had taught him. And suddenly a swing and a flick and a turn, he had the ball, he was cruising down, he was on the way to turning, and he twisted and hit the ball brilliantly and fast, straight into the goal, jubilation running through him. It was exquisite. He was the difference between the 2 teams, and he knew it. Sweat was pouring down, but he was now helping the team that was losing win the game. Not only were they coming back, but they were ahead with the next point going over the bar. Suddenly the end of the game was blown up, and he was lifted up high on shoulders. Screaming roars erupted all around. They were hugging, they were screaming, they were hoisting him up and throwing him around. People exclaimed, "What's his name? What's his name? The blonde man, the young lad. He's the hero. The team down to 13. This story must be remembered and be told well." Realisation dawned on young Demna. Oh no, he climbed back down. He thanked everyone. They were all asking him who he was, what was his name, where was he going, but he had to go, he had to run. He ran back, jubilation still in his heart, pure and utter joy still pumping through his veins, but he definitely had done something wrong. He knew it. Leolukra was going to kill him. After all, he shouldn't have even been there. He shouldn't have been seen. He definitely shouldn't have been playing the game. So he avoided going back for a while. For a long while. Till it got dark. Very dark. He eventually came back to campsite. Leolukra was glaring at him. The hills are full of talk of a boy hurler. A blonde-haired boy. Looks much like cool, they said. Leolukra's dark eyes glared at Bommel. Her face livid flashed at Demna, who stood frozen. He went to bed that night, with icy silence around the camp, his eyes wide, trying to stir himself to sleepfulness. In a tense slumber, he managed to wait and rest out the hours until dawnbreak. The following morning, Bomel and Leilukra dressed him in rags. It's for the best. Bomel kissed him sweetly, eyes filled with tears. You'll go with the poets now. The poets will protect you. You'll be under their protection. No one would dare hurt a poet. We can't protect you here, not now. Now the story's out. Her eyes was filled with tears as she turned away. He was too young to be going out to face the world, she knew, but he'd have to. The poets, he was told, would take him across Ireland and teach him things that they weren't able to teach him anymore. Bomel covered her face, turning away. Demna didn't know what to say. Leilukra simply said, "Follow me." So he followed. Dressed in rags as he was, they came to the end of the forest, and then met some strange vagabonds, these people living in small trailers, horses hitched, all of them scruffy looking and looking at him warily up and down. Leilukra said, "This is him I told you about. He'll go under your protection now. We'll give you your thanks for it. No one will harm him as long as he's in your troop. Bard, a poet, whatever you want to call him. He's good with stories, good voice, he can sing. Well able to hunt too, he should be of use to you." She looked at Demna in his face. She held out a hand, and tenderly she spoke. "Now you listen to me, young Demna. You mind yourself out there, okay? You always remember the motto of the Fianna. An crown fun seoige. And you mind live by it. Keep yourself safe. Trust your limbs, your strength, your heart. And you try and do what you'll say you'll do. Clina in our Cree. Njart in our Njeg. Bert der air armrier." And with that, Leilukra closed her eyes, bowed her head, and Demna gave her a huge hug. A hug goodbye, they both knew. Right, well, we may be going there now, and sure we'll take him along with us for the ride. What you say his name was again? Leilukra stood to answer, and Demna stepped forward to be introduced. And just as he did, a woman came up to the man who had just spoken. "Oh, who's the blandy one, huh?" "That's not bad. That'll do, sure. Everyone needs a new name when it comes to the bard. Right, so, that's it. Fionn, come on, let's go."